We live in a society that worships youth. On television, in magazines, in advertisements and on billboards, what sells and what is sold to us is youth. But in some cultures, it is the elders of the community who are valued and whose wisdom is sought. In this series, we are going to seek out 6 prominent elders of our tribe, each over the age of 65, to see what life has taught them. Welcome to the Elders.
I tell you what, any boss who sacks anyone for not turning up today is a bum.
He has lived a life out loud and in public. First-class cricketer, Rhodes Scholar, self-confessed hedonist, political warrior. All these badges he has worn with pride. From an early age, his family believed he was destined to lead the country. And they were right. For 50 years, he has charmed and argued his way into the hearts and minds of Australia. This is Bob Hawke. What values did Claire Manelli raise you with?
My mother had a fanatical commitment to education. She was a teacher, and she impressed upon me the importance of developing whatever talents I had. It was pretty clear I had born with some, and she said, well, just don't sit back and take it easy. Work, develop what you've got. She was not just a believer, but she drove me.
Were you happy to be driven?
Not always.
You'd rather be outside playing, right?
But she was persuasive.
Persuasive. That sounds like a yes minister term.
And so that was the big thing. I mean, she was way ahead of her time too in regard to women. We had my father was a minister of religion, the congregational minister, and a lot of farmers, in the congregation. I can remember Mum just beating their brains, saying, "You send your sons to school, but not your daughters." And she had this absolute passionate commitment about sort of women's liberation. This was back in the 1930s, so she was ahead of her time.
Also an interesting model for you to see your parent fiercely arguing a case.
Oh, yeah.
To people that may not want to hear it.
Yeah, very much so. Oh, she didn't muck around.
Were you proud of her?
Oh, I was very proud of her, yeah. And Dad was the quieter one.
Your dad said a beautiful thing, one of the loveliest things I've ever heard a father say about his son, actually, which is that Bobby had an outflowing magic about him. You had a very special relationship, didn't you? Can you explain?
With my dad?
Yeah. What was that bond, do you think? Why was it so strong?
I just loved him and he loved me. He would read to me endlessly. When I can remember, was small, read me a story, Dad read, and he just would go on reading and encourage me to read. And when you have a parent that does that, the responses is obvious, and the bond between us was just remarkable. He was the most humble man, the most decent man I've ever met in my life. He always looked for the best in people, to find positives. And he said something to me that always remained with me. He said, if you believe in the fatherhood of God, you must necessarily believe in the brotherhood of man. It follows necessarily. And even though I left the church and was not religious, that truth remained with me. It was lovely. The day of the election that I got elected Prime Minister was his 85th birthday. And I remember him saying to me, "Son, that's the best birthday present I ever had." And we came back, he was with us, we came up from Melbourne to Canberra to the tally room. We were staying at the Lakeside Hotel, and a few of the journos were talking to me in the morning. They said, "Oh, he's a great man, your father." He said, "He's been walking around telling anyone he can find how lucky Australia is." It's very funny.
There was a belief in your family that you would one day be Prime Minister. Why was there that belief?
Oh, I think that Mum seemed to have had some view about it. You know, when I was born, I don't know. She said there was something special, but that's a bit embarrassing to talk about.
Well, no, it's interesting because it's about the power of the parent to shape the child. It wasn't just a vague belief and it wasn't a boastful belief. There was a sense of that within your family, wasn't there?
Particularly my mother, I think. And in our daily life, it wasn't. It was something that was talked about, but it was, you know, it was there. And the thing that I owe so much to them is that they gave me everything that I could have wanted, a totally loving environment, a sense of self-confidence. I can remember as a child, they always encouraged me to express point of view. They said, none of this seen and not heard business. So if I had a point of view, I was to express it. But they sacrificed everything to ensure that I had everything I needed in terms of education. So I couldn't have asked for anything more.
So the power of the parent to shape the child is
enormous.
Enormous.
Absolutely enormous.
Looking down at the crowd, which is down below here at the tally room in Canberra, waving.
In 1983, Ellie Hawke's belief that her son would one day become Prime Minister was proven to be true. Bob Hawke swept to power on a wave of popular support, the only Prime Minister ever elected without having sat in Parliament as Leader of the Opposition. How intoxicating is the excitement of being in office, of having the Prime Ministership?
I think it's probably like when you start drinking. I mean, you get more easily intoxicated in the beginning, and it's more exciting. But certainly on that first day when you wake up and say, "I'm Prime Minister," it's an exhilarating feeling. But the reality is, Andrew, that the weight of work, the sheer intensity and volume of the things that you have to deal with doesn't leave much room for exhilaration.
How do you deal with the actual and emotional intensity of a position like that?
Well, by making sure that it's not the work of one man. You look at the situation with Carter, President Carter, insisted on supervising who was going to be using the White House tennis court. Come on. I mean, it's a question of prioritisation and delegation. And if you haven't got that capacity for prioritisation and delegation, you'll be on the road to the bin.
What, in your view, is the essence of power?
Well, the essence of power is the knowledge that what you do is going to have an effect, not just an immediate, but perhaps a lifelong effect on the happiness and the well-being of millions of people. And so I think the essence of power is to be conscious of what it can mean for others. One of the great things about being Prime Minister was that hardly a day would go by at the end of which you didn't have the knowledge that you'd been able to do something. May only have been for one person, or may have been for the country as a whole, or even might have been an international thing. But you'd been able to do something which you thought was going to make someone or a lot of people better off or happier.
We've all seen politicians who, to use the colloquial, have had to eat a shit sandwich. You know, we know they're saying the opposite of what they believe. How do you carry that around without it eating away at you?
Yeah, it's a good question, and you've just got to, I used the phrase prioritisation before. You know, there's got to be a profit and loss account in this compromise business. You just can't compromise just to make someone happy. For me, it's got to be part of a process of saying, well, if I give away a bit on that, on something which is not a matter of fundamental principle, but if I give way on that, then there's got to be a plus in it for the bigger purpose.
I noticed you had your bookshelves there amongst this vast library, Yes Minister, the collected scripts of Yes Minister. Now, come on. You would never own to this in office, but I've always felt that the scripts of Yes Minister were fairly close to form, only wittier.
Oh, it was essential viewing as far as I was concerned.
Did you recognise yourselves in there?
I recognised the game, yeah, sure. And I've seen it happen with some of my ministers.
What chance do you give yourself? What odds?
Time will tell.
Whether on the cricket pitch, in the pub, or in front of the full bench of the Arbitration Commission, Bob loved to compete and win. Including 10 years as president of the ACTU, he spent 2 decades in the fiercest arenas of Australian politics.
Paul Keating publicly launched his leadership challenge.
From observation, it is both a brutal and brutalising experience being in politics. What is the effect of that over a long period of time?
Obviously, when Paul challenged me and finally won, we weren't bosom buddies. We didn't get into lengthy social intercourse of some time, but we're friends now, and he's coming to dinner here shortly. So I think it differs for different people. Some people, when they have a fight, it becomes personally bitter and lasting. But there's no reason why that should be so. And looking back on it, I mean, I can't remember any, fights that I had that finished up with lasting enmities.
I'm surprised to learn, for instance, that Paul is coming to dinner, because a lot of people do succumb in life, in all walks of life, to bitterness. They latch onto an argument and they won't let it go.
Yeah, well, you see, hatred and envy are the most corrosive elements in life. And you look at people, I see people destroyed or enormously diminished by envy and by hatred. Life is short.
What about anger? How have you dealt with your anger?
Well, I think I've probably dealt with it in the sense that I tend to, if I am angry, I express it. I don't bottle it up. Well, some occasions when you've got it to some extent. But if I feel anger, I express it, and it's not then something that is biting and eating away inside you. And it gets back to what I've just said. I mean, if bottling up these emotions and so on is a terrible thing.
Bob Hawke's last official duty, unveiling an Aboriginal painting from the Barunga community, was one close to his heart.
It is also true that the document itself, in one sense, is not the important thing. The important thing is what's in our minds and in our hearts.
I read an interview with you many years ago where you felt a bit embarrassed about the fact that you showed your emotions so readily. When you look back on it now, has that actually been a strength for you?
I've always been rather amazed by the people or sort of condiment. I mean, it's like I've got curly hair, and I also tend to show my emotions. I mean, that's it. Frankly, if I could just have a button that I press and say, I won't show tears, I probably would have pressed that button. Not on every occasion, but on some. But there it is, it's part of you, like your hair. So what?
How important is it to have a healthy ego?
Well, look, if you haven't got confidence in yourself, how in the hell can you expect other people to have confidence in you? Really as off-putting is where you see people sort of excessively proud or seem to be very proud about things that they've got no reason to be proud about. I mean, I think it's very silly to be proud or boast about your intellect. You can be born with a squiggly ear or a crooked nose or a fine intellect. You didn't have any bloody thing to do with it. You were born with it. What your responsibility is, what you're born with, is to nurture it and make the most of it.
That's your mum talking there.
Yeah.
What was a failure in your life that you learnt from?
A failure that I learnt from, I suppose the most obvious and probably the best known was that on occasions I allowed drink to get the better of me. I lived an extremely gregarious life at the ACTU, and I did some silly things at times.
Blanche, she didn't gild the lily. She described you as, when you were a drinker, as a loathsome drunk. You were a very full-on drinker, weren't you?
Oh, yeah, I do most things full on, and I, as I've openly said, there were occasions where I was certainly less than attractive.
So I'm really interested that you were able to give up, because people have problems with alcohol and it bedevils them their whole life. How did you do that?
I just said, I'm going to give it up.
Did you literally just stop?
Yes, I stopped, and I did it at a time which I knew would really test me. It was just, the ACT still, and I used to go each year to Geneva for the month of June, which was the annual conference of the ILO, and I really worked hard, but I also played hard. Got off the plane in Geneva when I arrived, and my friends were there to say, "Oh, come on, in we go, let's have a drink." I said, I'm not drinking that. Look of absolute unbelief on their face, but I knew if I could get through that month there, I'd be right, and I did. I didn't have a drink there, and I didn't. From then on, it was it. I just that was from about May 1980, and I just said to myself, if you're going to become Prime Minister of this country, you can't afford ever to be in a position where you can make a fool of yourself or of your country. And I never had a drop by the whole period I was in Parliament.
That's remarkable willpower. The first time to say no is maybe not the hardest because you're full of determination. But I'm figuring about 2 or 3 weeks into the decision, you were thinking of a frosty one. Would I be?
Oh, yeah. The thought was there, but no, I made up my mind, that was it.
When you drank again, what had changed?
They were making wine in Western Australia, Margaret River. I hadn't tasted for it.
Did you ever go back to that excess?
No. Oh, I've had a couple of occasions when I've drunk more than I should have, but not no. As this will be my last speech in this chamber as Prime Minister after nearly 9 years, I would sincerely like to thank all my ministerial colleagues and those of my party who have accorded me the privilege of leading this party and this government.
In December 1991, after a long and bitter fight with Paul Keating, Bob Hawke became the first Labor Prime Minister to be removed from office by his own party.
I thank you most sincerely.
What did it feel like to relinquish power?
I was sad about the circumstances, as I knew that I was still very fit and able to go on doing a good job, and the government was doing a good job. So the circumstances were upsetting. But looking back on it, one of the enormous pluses of the end of my premiership was that it led to the situation where I married Blanche, and that has been, just an indescribable joy in my life and the strength.
You've described it as a meeting of souls. Is that how it is?
It's very difficult talking about these things, and I don't want in any sense to diminish what had gone before. But I must be honest, this is something that has brought me, in every sense of love, all that I can imagine any human being could ever imagine. It's the physical love, of course, is important, but the emotional and intellectual communion that we have
What makes a good marriage?
Well, there's got to be physical attraction, obviously, but I think terribly important is the having a considerable degree of shared interest. I mean, you just see so many marriages in which, apart from their kids, there's not a real shared interest, and obviously there's got to be a preparedness to to understand the needs of the other. If the two of you are like that, it's those sorts of things that make marriage such a delight.
You've been on the record as talking about walking away at times in your life from the responsibilities of fatherhood because of career. What was the cost of that to you and the cost of that to your family?
Oh, it was a heavy cost. It's one of those areas where, if you could have life over again, you would try and do some things differently. In the early days of my marriage, I was the ACT, I was the advocate, and then as the president, it was indescribably hectic and time-consuming. And I made it a bit more time-consuming than at times it was necessary, but I was gradually building up my political career, and that came at a cost to the family relationship. There's no doubt about that. You regret that. You then, without trying to, self-justification, I think you're entitled to enter into the balance sheet the pluses that you're able to give to the family as a result of all these things that wouldn't otherwise have been available. But that can't eliminate some of the sadness that comes from feeling that you could have been a better father.
Is it difficult for you sometimes to compare your fathering to that of your own father?
Well, the world which I was operating was so different from that one. It was an infinitely more simple world. I feel terribly sorry in so many ways for the kids that are coming and the kids that are going to come. It's such a difficult world for them.
It's a fundamental question. As you say, our ability to create, to change our universe has evolved almost beyond imagination.
Yeah.
But do human beings evolve? Is human nature essentially the same as it's always been?
Well, it's so we've got a lobotomy. We've had a lobotomy. There's one side, right, which is developed, exponentially. The way, we can actually produce goods and services and communicate now is just infinitely beyond recognition compared to just less than a century ago. That side of the brain has just blossomed, flourished, and given the opportunity for us to have a life beyond imagination. The other side is, if anything, is withered. It certainly hasn't matched the growth of this side. Our social engineering capacity, our sort of moral conscience, if you like, consciousness, it hasn't developed.
You looked genuinely sad before when you were talking about the world that our children are coming into. Are you optimistic for the future of the planet?
I'm by nature, I have all my life by nature been an optimist, Andrew. But I've got to say that when I look at the facts now in this world, there are not many grounds for optimism. Take the elements. Just take population for a start. Population is exploding. We've got to do something about getting a sustainable population level. And of course this gets back to poverty, it gets back to the education of women and so on. We've got the problems of food supply, of global warming, massive increases in population. Now, these are not the figments of Bob Hawke's imagination. These are facts. You've got, over 1 billion people in the world, of over 6 billion now, living in absolute poverty, and half the world's population living in very meagre situations.
It seems to be an insurmountable problem, the question of overpopulation and overconsumption, and that we have finite resources and that we're finding more and more ways of using them. What is the hope?
The answer to that question is how are developed nations going to be persuaded of the need for action? I mean, it's how does the message get through? I mean, you look in terms of political leadership. There are no great political leaders around.
We live also in an age of constant distraction, where for a lot of people, what may have happened to Britney Spears last night is far more interesting than...
Yeah. Well, I don't want to be a media basher, but there's obviously the people who run the media, both public and private, have got an enormous responsibility. I do despair when I see the prioritisation of issues presented by the media. It's, as you say, I mean, I literally cringe whenever I see the name Paris Hilton. For instance, who wants to know about what bloody Paris Hilton's doing when you've got half the world living in, poverty, when you've got the potential for the world blowing itself up?
You've referred a couple of times to God and your journey with faith. You were born into a very religious family.
Yeah.
But you lost a sense of strict religious belief. Why was that?
It started when I went to India in end of 52. I went as a delegate to the World Christian Youth Conference there, and singing away there, and there were all these poverty-stricken kids at the gate of this palatial place where we were feeding our face. And I just had this struck by this enormous sense of irrelevance of religion to the needs of people. It started to unwind from that point. But I've not become an atheist. I am an agnostic. I mean, I just don't know. I don't think one should spend too much time thinking about it, simply because there is so much to be done now, on the here and now.
Would you like there to be an afterlife?
Then what I would say intellectually, if there is an afterlife, I'm sure that reincarnation is part of it. So that the only way I think about that in terms of an afterlife is, well, what would you come back as?
What's your bet?
Well, I hope according to the Buddhist philosophy, if you've lived a good life now, you gradually come up and up the sky until you reach ineffable Brahma. Well, I hope I've lived a good enough life not to sort of go backwards and come back as a caterpillar.
You'd hope to come back as a test cricketer, aren't you?
or a good golfer.
When you look in the mirror, what do you see?
Sort of a bloke there that I'm reasonably pleasantly surprised in terms of how he's sort of aging, and I certainly am aging, but I feel good. The thing I couldn't stand is if my mind went. So I do at least a couple of cryptic crosswords a day, and the difficult to do, because I genuinely believe that intellectual exercise is important.
I'm sure what you've seen happen with Hazel, as with anyone close to you, must have a powerful impact.
Yes, I've seen so many people, including Hazel, who've been afflicted by Alzheimer's and forms of dementia, and it's so sad. It is absolutely sad, and I really can't think of anything worse than having your mind go where you can't think and connect.
But where you still have a sense of you.
Sense of yourself and a sense of your relationship to other people. It's death. It's a premature death.
The question of loss is a very hard one, and your relationship with Clem was so close. How did you deal with the loss of that man who was probably the greatest man in your life, I think it's fair to say?
Yeah, he was my best mate. He was the perfect patient. They said in the old people's home that he was in, he was no bother, as I knew he wouldn't be. And he was so calm and peaceful about it all. So I had a sense of loss, of course, but it was right that he went then, because it was time for him to go. I knew it was the best thing for him to go, so I was at peace with him in that sense, and we just said goodbye, and he was, I guess, sure in his mind he'd see me again. I couldn't have the same degree of assuredness, but the important thing is that he's always with me. I mean, his impact upon me is always there.
I find with my father, even though neither of us believe in an afterlife, I still find myself sometimes thinking, I wonder where you are. Do you find that with Clem?
No, I don't find myself thinking where you are. I just have a great... when I think of him, there's just two emotions. One, what a great and decent man you were, and thanks for being my dad.
Final question. To a young man, early 20s, the same age you were when you set out for Oxford, what advice would you give them about how to approach life?
The thing I would stress first of all is education, because education doesn't finish at secondary school. Education is a lifelong thing. So I'd say to them, keep learning, keep learning, keep learning. And secondly, I would say helping others to develop their potential is just about the most satisfying thing that you can do. So just don't think about advancing your own interest, but in whatever way you can, try and help those around you. This is both the right and the good thing to do, but also it'll make your own life more satisfying. I think those are the basic things I'd say.
In a moment, a look at next week's Elder. And on Wednesday, come behind the public face of politics to meet the Spin Doctors, as our new comedy The Hollow Men continues, 9:30 Wednesday night on ABC One.